Welcome to one more edition of Politics and Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We have a very special guest for us with us today, Tom Bowman, president of Bowman Change Inc. and author of What If Solving the Climate Crisis is Simple, and co-author of Empowering Climate Action in the United States. Tom Bowman has never bought the idea that some problems are too complex to solve. With razor-thin like precision, he slices through the Gordian knot of the spirit and misperceptions that lead to a sense of defeat when it comes to the climate crisis. The result is an inspiring and practical narrative that will leave readers feeling uplifted and empowered to create a future they are eager to embrace. Welcome to Politics Done Right, Tom. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me,
Well,
Umberto.
look, first of all, let me ask you this. It's a stupid question, but it's the first one I've got to ask. Why did you write the book?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. It's not stupid at all. I've been thinking about a book like this for a long, long time because I've been working for the last, 10 or 15 years, no, actually about almost 20 years on communication about the climate crisis and science communication. And I've always been flummoxed by the fact that I took action to decarbonize my business. I feel empowered to work on it. I see other people who do, but the surveys all show that the vast majority of people feel dispirited. They sit on the sidelines. They don't think they have a role to play. And so I've studied that, and the opportunity came up last year with Changemakers Books to write a book very quickly, and it was a great way to sort of gel all this thinking and work I'd been doing for quite a long time.
Let me tell you what I love about your book, first of all.
Mhm.
It's not very long, it's to the
That's right.
point. You don't fill it with a whole lot of fluff.
That's
I write books as well, and at 200 pages or so, which is about what I need to tell the entire stories that I normally tell. That's about all you need. But somehow we're getting these books that are just you know, so
that's
big. So
right.
I appreciate that, and you've used every word to tell a story. Now, before we get specifically into your book, you said you feel that people are dispirited about the climate. Don't you think this has a lot to do with the different forces that are making them dispirited? In other words, forces that don't feel climate change, or that what is required to mitigate climate change is in their interests. So instead, what they do is they just pollute people's minds. Your
They do.
thoughts?
They do. There's a very active campaign that's been going on for a very long time, led by ideological libertarians and the fossil fuel industry to keep people from taking action. And so they question the science, they question governance. They say that if we solve the climate crisis, government will intrude in our lives and ruin our freedoms and take them away, that our economy will crash. None of those things has to be true. But it's an intentional campaign to protect their own financial interests.
Sadly, you said none of those things have to be true. They could be true, but it's also going to be true that if we do absolutely nothing, that what we know as America today, its coastlines, its the peace and the weather and all of that will be no more. So I mean, we don't have a choice but to change either way that we go. Correct?
That's absolutely right. And we're feeling the effects today. I live in California where the wildfires have been they've been unreal. I've never seen anything like this in all the time I've lived and grew up in California. The air is choking every year, and whole communities are being burned to the ground. There's there's intense storms in the Midwest and floods that are 100-year floods happening every few years. Um, so yes, exactly. We're already into it. And the question is, how far we can allow it to go?
Yeah, it's amazing because a lot of people think we have to burn everything that we have in the ground, not realizing that in the primordial years when those things were being formed, we had different organisms on the planet that
Mhm.
had different requirements that could absorb that sort of energy. But guess what? They died out, and
That's
that's the remnants of their deaths.
Yeah, and you think about the fossil fuels in the ground have accumulated over millions and millions, tens, hundreds of millions of years. And the idea that we would burn them all up in just a few generations and they never exist again or wouldn't exist for hundreds of millions of years more, That just seems crazy to me.
And unnecessary, right?
Absolutely unnecessary. Did you know? I mean, today, I don't know when the podcast will go live, but tonight, Ford is apparently going to release its electric
F-150.
F-150.
Yes.
That's a game changer. That's the most popular vehicle in America by a mile. And if that comes out electric and it's better than the gasoline powered car, look out, because that means there's going to be a lot of hunger for it.
Well, you know, Rachel Maddow did a great piece on it yesterday, and one of the most important parts that I think she did that gives a lot of credence to electric cars is the ability to control torque. And the
Yeah.
reason I'm saying that, I don't know if you're an engineer or not. I'm an engineer by training, and I understand those concepts. And it was amazing watching that truck pull several trains,
Yes.
right?
It's like a
And something
million.
that a geared truck really wouldn't be easy wouldn't easily do. And I think when those kind of folk who like pickup trucks see that, they'll see that being environmentally friendly does not mean you have to compromise anything else. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, the role of the business or the entrepreneur is to create green products that people actually like better than the products that came before. And, Teslas are amazing cars.
Yeah,
The Sun Leaf is a fun little car as far as it goes. The other electric cars are fun, but a truck is practical. I mean, there are things you can do in a truck that you can't do in a sedan. And so to see a pickup truck that's hugely popular go electric is going to, depending on what they've come up with, has the potential to be a real change maker.
of course, that means that we have to get that infrastructure throughout the country with the 500,000 or so charging stations around the country to ensure that those folks who make the leap and buy those cars, they do just fine.
Yeah, that's right. And for a lot of people, I mean, most people would put a charger in at home unless
Right,
you live in a condo complex or an apartment building where you don't have control over that. But if you do have, control and you can put a charger in at your home, you just charge it up at night and it's ready to go the next day.
right.
And you've got to drive an awful long way before you need to recharge. Most people aren't driving 200 or 300 miles a day. You do it on long trips and you need the capacity to charge up a bit. But for daily driving, charging it overnight is easy.
Right, right. And probably not all that expensive as well, given the economy of these new devices that are coming out.
Yeah, that's right. They're cheap. It's electricity costs a lot less than gasoline, and it doesn't spike. It doesn't go up and
Right.
down and up and down, and you never have to stop at a gas station.
And then, of course, with a lot of people that get that, they're probably going to have solar cells on their homes, et
Mhm,
cetera, to sort
mhm.
of mitigate that. Okay. Um, are we too late from your book? Are we too late
Yeah,
to
that.
solve the crisis? First of all, we're talking about the book titled "What If Solving the Climate Crisis is Simple?" And I'm going to tell you, Tom, I've always thought that it was simple if we wanted to make it so.
Mhm.
But I mean, the objections come to those who are vested in the old technologies and don't and see that move to be a bit more expensive than they would like to make. So, is it too late?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I think the answer resoundingly is no. We're on a trajectory, right? We've changed the climate some already. We can't go backward unless we invest super heavily in technologies to pull carbon out of the air.
Hmm.
And that may become attractive in the future. It's in development now as technology, but we can choose how far we let this advance. And we've been taught, most of us, about climate change by scientists, and scientists study complicated things, complex systems. The climate system is really complex. And so we've been taught to think that it's really complex, and we've been taught to think that the responses to it have to be really complex. But that's just an interpretation. That's just a way of looking at it. And if we set that aside for a minute, we discover that really all we have to do is stop burning fossil fuels and do it very quickly. And when you think about that, it makes the climate crisis accessible to everyone, to every business, to every household, to every person, to every local government. And that's a lot easier to deal with than what looks like it's a huge global problem.
You know what is interesting, Tom? And as bad as this pandemic was, where we lost hundreds of thousands of Americans and millions of people around the world. What I think this showed us, however, with the decline in usage of gasoline and fossil fuels, we didn't die. We
That's
weren't superbly uncomfortable. The economy was a lot less,
right.
but at the same time, we consumed a lot less.
That's
So
right.
we all and still most Americans got a bit fatter.
Yes, they
So
did.
so the truth of the matter is the pandemic, as bad as it was, and I love your thoughts on this, seemed to prove that we could have massive reduction in fossil fuels, use of fossil fuels, without having a devastating effect on our personal economies. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We've been taught to think that society can only change very, very slowly and very, very incrementally. But last March, a year ago, the world suddenly stayed home
Hmm.
everywhere, worldwide. And it all happened in about 3 or 4 days. You know, when the World Health Organization said this is a pandemic, it's really dangerous, everybody stayed home. And what happened? The streets got quiet, the sky cleared up, the air got fresher over major cities. We were all living in fear, but if you took the time to notice, our world became a more pleasant place and people were finding ways to connect. You know, there's this great video from Italy of you see these wine glasses attached to long sticks and they're clinking. And as the camera zooms out, you realize these people are on their balconies across this narrow street from one another, having a happy hour together in their isolated pods in their apartments, right? But they're finding ways to connect with their friends and neighbors. And now we've discovered most people who've worked at home don't want to have to commute and go back to a corporate office. They'd rather work at home and they can be productive at home. This could change the world in big ways, and it happened in a heartbeat.
You know, it's amazing because I told when this started to occur, I did a few of my programs, my shows, and I said, you know, this is going to change how we work forever. And amazingly, companies like Woolworks, they are sort of concerned because it doesn't fit their business model.
Right.
And they're now trying to shame people back from working at home to going back to the office. Notice I said working, I didn't say slobbing at home.
Right.
I
That's
said
right.
working at home because it affects their bottom line. So there again, once again, we see where companies are, they're not looking at the better, what's best for us all or for the environment,
Right.
just for their own
You
personal bottom line.
know, I've been a business owner myself for about 30 years, small business. And you have financial obligations you have to meet. But if you own a business, you're in your primary business, no matter what you do, is adaptation. You're changing, the markets are changing, the rules are changing, the
Yes,
economies are changing. You're always thinking, how do I remain viable in this new environment I'm in?
exactly.
That's every day. So yes, there are ups and downs. You win some, you lose some in business, and that's not fun, for anybody. We need to create a soft landing for people as best we can and create new opportunities. But that's happening all around us. New opportunities are emerging, and we shouldn't be afraid of that.
And you know, one the benefits of that again is we get a profit, and that's the whole rationale. We take the risk and we get a profit. Those of us who do these business things. Now, what do you mean by hang the climate crisis upside down?
Yeah. So I described earlier this Gordian knot of complex systems that is the climate. It's the atmosphere and the oceans and the polar ice caps and the biosphere and the way plants and animals interact with atmospheric chemistry and all of this complicated stuff. And then we've been taught that when you want to solve a piece of the climate puzzle, we've been talking about electric cars and transportation. You start pulling on that, and now you're pulling on technology and supply chains and international finance, and those things affect food supply and energy generation and geopolitics. And all of a sudden, you feel like you're pulling on. You started with one thread, and you're pulling on this enormous knot that you can't figure out how to untie. That's what it feels like to most people. I I was an art student in college, And I was working on a painting one day that I just couldn't make work. I tried changing colors, I tried shifting the composition. It was just a disaster. It wasn't working. And my teacher came up behind me and he said, I tell you what you do, hang it upside down and go home. Because when you see it tomorrow, upside down, you're going to see what's wrong with it because you'll see it completely differently. Right.
Right.
And as a design office owner, I literally did that many times. And that's how you figured out which designs were working and which ones to throw away. But it also applies to other kinds of issues. In other words, if you're stuck, if you can't figure out how to solve a problem, ask yourself, is there an assumption that I've made that's part of every solution I've tried? Is it a technical requirement that somebody gave me? Is it an assumption I'm making about how things work? What is the one thing that's consistent in all of your attempts to solve it? When you find it, the bigger it is, the better. The more sacrosanct it is, the better. Set it aside and see what happens. In my experience, what happens is you suddenly discover all kinds of new ways to think about it, new opportunities.
You expand the horizons.
Exactly. So it disrupts this familiar pattern of thinking that keeps us stuck. And the assumption that we make that's most troublesome, I think, on climate is that it's too complex for you and me, right? Only technical elites somewhere in the world are going to come up with a master plan for the globe, and everybody's going to buy into it magically, and we're going to solve the climate crisis. And we all know it doesn't work that way.
Right.
But if we set that aside and we say, what's left? Well, all we have to do is stop burning fossil fuels, and we need to do it quickly because we don't want this to continue, and we don't want to fail. So there's a slogan in the book, right? Stop burning fossil fuels well before mid-century, and absolutely positively do not fail. When that becomes your mantra, you start looking at everything you do in your workplace and in your home life a little differently. And I know this from experience because I did this with my small business. It's a 2,000-foot building and 12 people. We got measured by the climate registry, so I had independent measurement of our carbon footprint, and we reduced our emissions by 2/3 in 15 months, saved money, and nobody could tell that our lifestyle had changed.
Right.
Right.
But you made a difference.
But it shows how much waste we take for granted in our normal way of thinking, and that when we disrupt it by hanging the picture upside down, we discover, oh, there are ways to solve this and make the world I'd really rather live in.
We recently had a woman on here. I don't remember her name. She talked about waste, and it was amazing how much we waste and how easy it was to mitigate that waste. So, I mean, just doing little things that all of us could do, from Ziploc bags to other things,
And I'll tell you a little story that reveals how dumb we can all be, how stupid I was. Our business was to design exhibits for museums and trade shows, things like that. And we didn't build them. We had exhibit builders who were located about 60 miles from our office in Southern California. So people had to commute through Los Angeles traffic to get to work. And then you drive to the meeting when you had to have a meeting at the shop. And then you drive back 60 miles to the office, and then tired, frustrated, stressed. You still had your deadlines to meet. You'd stay late and you'd go home late. And we lived with this for years. We just thought it was the way business worked because that's what everybody did. Well, two of my employees moved all the way to Palm Springs and had to commute all the way to Long Beach. That's over 100 miles through rush hour traffic every single day. At least they carpooled. But we lived with this for a couple of years. And when we decided to decarbonize, it made me look at that situation differently and say, holy cow, that's a lot of pollution, right? And so we tried an experiment. You two guys who live in Palm Springs, you can only come to work once a week, and you work at home the rest of the time. And if anybody needs to meet with a shop, schedule it so it's the first thing in your day or the last thing in your day, so you do it on the way to work or on the way home. And it took about a month for people to adjust to a new style. And then I saw the spirits in the office get lighter. People were happier. They weren't so tired. They got to go home on time. They weren't so stressed, right? And this is what we had always wanted, but we'd never gone looking for the thing that was holding us up, right? We're all doing this with carbon every day and with waste every day. And all most of us have to do is turn the picture upside down so we start to see that stuff and say, holy cow, I can eliminate that waste.
You know, Tom, we could go through all these things that I think enlighten quite a few people for hours. Unfortunately, we only have 30 minutes. So there's a couple of chapters I want to discuss with you. And this one the name, I think you were trying to be a little bit, what's the word that I want to say? You wanted to put a little sting here. You said um, climate justice and a white male.
Mm-hmm.
Explain yourself.
Yeah. Last year was the year that Americans everywhere just saw just how violent and unstable the lives of African Americans, people of color, are in the United States. We've always heard from climate scientists that low income communities and people of color suffer the most and have the fewest resources, right? And we know that there is structural racism in our society. But we saw it with the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. It came home to everybody. And one of the things I heard people saying is, you white people need to start having your own conversations about race. Um, and I'm a white male, right? I benefit from all the privileges of being white, well-educated, and male. And so I wanted to write a chapter that starts to confront that question. And in it's I don't present the answers. I would say it's a little clunky, you know? I mean, how can we not be clunky when we stumble into this? Um, because in our own lives as white males, however we're situated, we learn to accept cultural racism as we progress through school and into our careers. And we understand the reward system that we have to play by in order to be successful, and that is a very biased system. And so we find ourselves in this situation, and we don't want to be here, and we don't know how to get out of it. And I've been really, really fortunate in the last year to work on this Action for Climate Empowerment project with a diverse group of people in relationship with indigenous leaders, people of color from Puerto Rico and the United States, members of the historically Black colleges and universities, and to begin to have the experience of relationship that allows a person who's uncomfortable about racism and is a white person start to be in genuine relationships with people that can make a difference. And that's, I think, what a lot of people need to do. Um, so I was trying to sort of uh, just be vulnerable and honest and say, hey, look, I'm no better than anybody else. I grew up in this world, and I've unconsciously adopted all of the problems. How do we get beyond this together?
Well, you know, when I saw the chapter at first, I kind of giggled, and then I said, "Let me read bits and pieces of this thing." And I mean, first of all, it's good that in the chapter you were able to express that there is in fact systemic racism, and the environmental impact also plays a big role in there. I mean, cities are places where people of color live in general. Because of the way it's structured, it's hotter and suffer more climate damage than places that are more wealthy, which more wealthy generally defines more white. And I was glad to see that you were able to stitch that into the book, because I think the overbearing statements of racism all of the times is better catered in a fashion that people can actually see with the lives. So I think you did a great job of that. But my question to you is, um, how long have you realized of? First of all, there's a thought. Grogan, the podcast Grogan. I don't know if you know who he is or not.
Mm-hmm.
He got in a bit of trouble because his statement was, because of the wokeness of society today, soon white men just have to shut up. And I just read that this morning, and I hadn't planned on asking you this, but since you had that chapter, I said, what's your thought about that? Because I really like to know if that's how a lot of white men are feeling right now, that because
Yeah.
everybody is now saying we want a piece of that action, if that's how white men are feeling.
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words, for writing that chapter. I'll tell you that some of my white friends have said, "What? Why is that chapter in there?"
Hmm.
Right? And this is reveals our starting point.
Right.
And there's a degree to which people feel insecure with their own success or their own position, right? We're always trying to ensure that our social position is sound.
Mm-hmm.
And for an awful lot of white people, I think our common thought is that if we give more power to people of color, we're going to lose power ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels scary. And when you finally dig into this and you finally are in relationship with people who don't look like you and come from different backgrounds from you, and you and you care for their welfare as much as you care for their own, they're your friends, they're your colleagues, you discover that you discover what they have to live with that you don't have to live with. I can tell you from my own experience, it's like, man, give these people power. They
Yeah.
need power. Uplift them, give them power. I don't need to hold it. I told somebody, you don't get to be the white savior when you get into relationship with people of color. The good news is you don't have to be the white savior.
Right. What
You
is
discover that this is a dialogue.
let me tell you something, Tom. Voices like yours are necessary, especially as a white man. Okay.
Mhm.
And I hope that you're more out there, more in people's spaces to promote that kind of a message, and because I think it is so important. The good thing about it is this: those who have lived through the lack of privilege are not trying to take away privilege from anybody. Those who've had the lack of power are not trying to disempower anybody. They're just seeking to have the same level. And if that message could be conveyed to specifically the white man, that
Oh, yeah.
you need not fear that what some, and it's interesting because it's a minor amount of, I mean, that's just how power works. It's not a race thing. I mean, and I get in trouble a lot of for saying this, but if you really believe that race is a social construct,
Hmm.
you have to understand what racism is then. And then you look at pigmentation and physical characteristics and all of that quite a bit differently. And
Yeah.
I'm at the stage in life where I only look at race as a social construct, so I have no fears about any of it. So I hope men like you, white men like you, in the messaging that you have with your environmentalism and all the great books that you write, that you're able to cater it as you have in your book here. I just found it fascinating. Just like your white friends asked you, why did you have that chapter in there? I look at you and I said, you're a smart man to weave that chapter in there.
Well, thank you. It's the beginning of a conversation it's my throwing a stone in the water as a beginning of a conversation. You have to learn to listen. You have to stop. We have to stop assuming we have the answers, and we work hard to become experts in our lives, in our careers, and in various ways. And then we think we're experts, right? We
Mhm.
think we're the people who know, and that couldn't be further from the truth. There are technical things I know, but that doesn't mean I know how to find a
Right.
solution in a community somewhere else or even here. It needs to be created together. And when you finally are willing to let go of that, and it's disruptive, it's a little uncomfortable at first, but if you'll take the step, then you just discover how much goodwill and capacity and opportunity there is to create the world we really always
Really
wanted to.
want. Let me
Yeah.
tell you, Tom, it's been actually a pleasure speaking to you. And one other thing, most people are good. I mean, everybody,
I
most
would say
people are good.
I
Look,
couldn't.
we've been speaking to Tom Bowman, president of Bowman Change Inc., and author of What If Solving the Climate Crisis is Simple? I usually ask beforehand, is there something you'd like to say that I forgot to ask you?
If people are really intrigued by this, I'm going to give you a website that people could. That's not my own. Mine's kind of obvious. TomBowman.com. There's a website called ACE framework.us. that reports on dialogues just like this with a really diverse group of people who are seeking to make climate change in the United States in really productive ways.
Tom Bowman, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel, and number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.